Thank you, Z, and thank you everybody for watching today. I hope you enjoy this presentation. As Z said and Gaurav said earlier, I have a background in media and marketing. I've worked for the BBC for a number of years. I've worked for Gulf News in Dubai, and I currently work for FIPP, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. So I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm going to share my presentation with you, and we will run through that. Please do make sure to ask questions in the Q&A if you want to, and I can see those on my screen somewhere, and I will answer them at the end. So hopefully you can see my, why can't I see the, there we go. Can't see the thing anymore. One sec. What's happened there? This is the problem with Keynote, gang. There we go. Hopefully you can see my screen. I can't see you, but hopefully you can see my screen.
Your screen is nice and clear.
Good, thank you, Z. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the trends in media as we see them right now, and I'm going to try to put a perspective on that to allow you to think about that in the context of building a career in media, particularly in the marketing side of media rather than the journalism side. So just a little bit of a thought about where we get this information from. We are a media trade association. Here are some of the companies that are in our network. You'll recognize some of the brands in there: National Geographic, Lonely Planet, Marie Claire, but also within there are some of the largest companies in our publishing or magazine media world, which is obviously extended far from print into other sectors now, including digital media and live events. Most of these businesses started out as magazine publishers and are now something much bigger. So this presentation does reflect their knowledge, and it does also reflect a genuinely global picture of what we see as the trends in the market. But I wanted first of all to talk about the importance of understanding change, because I think this is going to be an absolutely crucial success factor when you're thinking about your future careers and you're thinking about a career in marketing in particular. This is taken from a great website called waitbutwhy.com, and basically this shows that humans are very bad at predicting the impact of change on humanity. We tend to underestimate the extent of that change. We look backwards. You can see the red line there, which is the trajectory based on the past growth rate, the past rate of change, and we use that as our guide for the future. We say, well, things have changed quite quickly in the past, so they will change quite quickly in the future. What we're actually seeing at the moment is that growth and change is happening exponentially, and therefore our predictions are underestimating the extent to which the world is changing. And you can see this in some of the technologies that we have around us, some of which was mentioned in the previous presentation. It's also important to think about change and the way that it happens and the way that it shapes. Change is not linear. It moves in S-curves. A new technology will come onto the market, it's slowly adopted at first, and then suddenly has mass adoption, and then the growth tails off as the market is saturated. You think about cell phones, for example. You can see here that the S-curves are getting closer together. And because they're getting closer together, the rate of change is increasing, and it takes less time for that change to reach saturation. So the coronavirus crisis that we've just come through, that all of us have just lived through, is accelerating this process as well. If you think about something like video conferencing, that's one that has been an S-curve, which has accelerated very, very quickly. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. If you look at the rate of technology and technology proliferation over time, this graph shows the introduction of new technology over the last 120 years or so. And actually, there have been lots of different examples of this. If you're starting on the left-hand end there, you'll see electricity, mains grid electricity, which was the first major societal technological impact of the 20th century. It's also important to note that not all of these things happen at the same rate, but also that the changes we're experiencing at the moment are not necessarily the only ones that have happened very rapidly within the last 70 or 80 years. It's also easy to think that we are suffering, or we are going through the largest amount of change that has ever happened in human history. That's not the case. There are other examples on here of things that were adopted very, very quickly and caused a lot of change in society or a lot of change in the industry. If you look in the 1960s, the introduction of color television and standardized shipping containers delivered an enormous amount of change to the global economy very, very quickly. In the case of shipping containers, that's the reason why you can buy a TV from Amazon for $200 instead of it costing $1,000, is because the cost of shipping has declined so rapidly over the last 50 or 60 years. But really the question for us as executives, as future potential executives, is to look at the right-hand end of this graph and to say to ourselves, Well, look, we're living in an age where social media and smartphones are reaching the top of their S-curves. They are coming to the point of mass adoption. Everybody in the world has got a social media account. Pretty much everybody in the world has got a smartphone, and some people have got two. And the question is, what's next? What's off the right-hand end of this graph? What is going to be the next technology that causes mass disruption to our world, and therefore the next technology that we, as future potential executives in this space, need to be thinking about? Nilesh suggested the metaverse. Facebook certainly believes that's the case. I'm less certain that that's going to be the case. If you look at some technology that's happening at the moment, it could be voice and voice services and interactive voice services. It could be AI. There's lots of different things, but the key is to keep an eye on what's happening at the right-hand end of this curve and think about what's next. And also, just to show that the rate of change is increasing, here's the number of years it took for a bunch of different technologies to get from 0 to 50 million users. So the top left-hand side, you have commercial airlines, commercial passengers on airlines. It took 68 years to go from the first passenger to the 50 millionth passenger. And then when we get to the bottom, we see some of the technologies that we're most familiar with. We think about the most disruptive technologies. Even they are relatively slow. Cell phones, 12 years, internet, 7 years, computers, 14 years. We get to the right-hand side and we can see that an app like Pokemon Go went from 0 to 50 million users in 19 days. And there's a very live example, Zoom, which is the video conferencing platform that everybody has been using during lockdown and during coronavirus, has seen a 400% increase in its share price since January of 2020. So these changes can happen very, very rapidly, and the rate of change is definitely increasing. So let's just think about the media industry more generally and think about the rapid changes that have taken place in the framework of this industry over the last 20 years. The three key axes of the kind of media and marketing space are, first of all, running up the side here, we have the content or the service type. Then we have the monetization model, because most media is based around monetization. Although it appears to be free to the end consumer, it's not. It's monetized in some way. And then we have the medium or the platform or the distribution platform that we're using. And if you think about what the changes have been to each of those things, in the last 20 years, we've seen an enormous explosion in content types. And I'll kind of tell you at the end what this means in terms of the overall media and marketing space. But the key dynamic here in content is that you've gone from having a relatively limited number of types of content into having a vast explosion of the different types of content that you can have. In monetization, the big change is that we're seeing the looming end of the advertising-based business model. I'll come on to why later, and replacing that with a consumer-facing business model. And then in the medium or the platform, we have seen the addition of two critical new platforms in the last 20 years. And you can obviously guess what those are. So if you think about the content or the service type, most newspapers and magazines, as would have been the original type of media that we would have had in the early part of the 20th century, before even radio was around, relied on text and images. Then we had video and audio with television and radio. Now we have data and data services and data-based content, and we have live experiences, live events, and all the rest of it. So those fundamental content types haven't changed. What has changed is the complexity with which they interact with one another, and also what's changed is the ability of every company and every individual to create these content types. Before, it was limited to professional companies. Now anybody in the world can create any type of content that they like. Monetization model, we have the D2C model that everybody's moving towards. D2C means direct to consumer. In other words, directly monetizing customers for the content and the media that they're buying. And that's replacing the indirect model of advertising-based businesses over the last 100 years or so. And then in platforms, we had, in the very early days of the 20th century, print. That soon came on stream with radio. Then we had television and cinema. We had in-person and live events. Then we had desktop computing towards the end of the 20th century. And now in the last 20 years, mobile and social, which have emerged as two absolutely critical platforms for media and for marketing. And one of the crucial aspects of this is that now the explosion of content types, the explosion of distribution options that digital media has given us, means that every business can be a media business. Media is not limited anymore to professional media companies. Every brand now recognizes that media is an integrated part of their marketing activity. A great example, and a member of FIPP, is Red Bull. Red Bull, the soft drink company, has a very large media business. The media business exists to sell soft drinks, but it also exists as a very successful media business in its own right. And you can see on this diagram that they have operations in all of those different content types and all of those distribution platforms that we spoke about earlier. So every company in the world is following the Red Bull model to some extent, because marketing is now media. Just a very quick word on what the areas of growth and the dynamics of the industry are right now. If you think about the two major revenue streams that we have, advertising and consumer media. In advertising, really it's a tale of two graphs. The first one here is what we expect to happen in terms of growth in advertising over the next 5 years after coronavirus. And you can see that growth is dominated by new formats. VR, which would include the Meta stuff as well, OTT video, which is video on demand, basically. Internet advertising generally is a source of growth still. Video games and esports, internet access advertising, but then some traditional ones as well, cinema and OOH. OOH is out of home, which is those posters and billboards you see around the city. And then at the other end of the scale, you can see that there's very limited growth in things like traditional TV advertising, books, newspapers and consumer magazines. What does this mean for us as media and marketing professionals? It means that we need to be focused a lot more on these new content formats as the source of growth rather than thinking about the legacy formats. But within that, we have to be very conscious that advertising is dominated by very few companies. This is the share of revenue from digital advertising in the US, and you can see that it's dominated by 3 companies. Google, Facebook, and Amazon, between them, control about 75% of the whole digital advertising market, and their dominance is getting bigger. So if you're a media business and you rely on digital advertising, you're competing in the very tiny little white space that lives at the top of that graph, and you're competing against every other media business in the world. And this is one of the prime motivations why the industry is switching away from reliance on advertising towards trying to directly monetize the consumer. Now, there's an issue with directly monetizing. Sorry, I should say, by the way, that directly monetizing the consumer consists mainly of 2 things: getting people to pay for content. So if you're a Netflix subscriber, you're paying for content on Netflix. Every media business in the world is trying to follow the Netflix model. And the other big area of focus for all media businesses at the moment is e-commerce, getting people to transact with you on the basis that you have a trusted relationship with your consumer and that your content is able to recommend things that they buy. So content and commerce are the 2. We call it content and commerce. The content and commerce play is the one that's dominating media business strategies at the moment. There is a problem with this at the moment. In order to do content and commerce, you have to own the relationship with the customer, and there is a big gatekeeper in the way. Once again, we find Google and Facebook in the way of this business model. This is the amount of traffic that these 2 organizations funnel into, in this case, the Parsley network, which is a big network of media businesses around the world. You can see that Google search funnels about 50% of that traffic, and Facebook funnels about 21% of this traffic. Really crucial message here as well. When you're thinking about this, whether you're in media or in marketing, people talk a lot about TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, all these different other social media networks. They are all, from a commerce point of view, completely useless. You can build a little bit of a business around something like Instagram with commerce using their own built-in platform. You have no access to the consumer data, which is a big minus. So you can get some scale. But in terms of driving traffic to you, in terms of being able to capture the relationship, the only game in town is Facebook. And Facebook is a really toxic platform. So toxic that it's being regulated. There is an enormous amount of regulation happening around the world. This is important because if you're going into the media or the marketing space, you need to be aware of the impact this legislation has on the activity that we undertake as an industry. In particular, privacy legislation. There's an enormous amount of privacy legislation happening across the world. This affects the way that we can capture data on our customers and use that data to transact with them. And that law, that position is changing all the time. This has gone from being utterly unimportant 5 years ago to being one of the crucial things that marketeers and media people have to know. How does privacy work? What is the legislation like in different companies or countries around the world? And what does it mean for my business? So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of the things that are happening in the media industry right now. We're moving from the advertising-based model to the consumer-based model. It's long overdue. That relies on having good access to customers and good customer data. There are some gatekeepers in the way of that, principally Facebook, but there's some regulation coming along that's going to help us do that. I haven't spoken about creativity. I haven't spoken about all the other things I could speak about because I only got 10 minutes. If you want to know more, please do go to our website, fipp.com, sign up to the newsletter, write to me, james@fipp.com. Very happy to answer your questions. And you can also follow me on Twitter @FIPPWorld and @FIPPCEO. And look forward to hearing your questions shortly. Thank you very much.